Okay, so as I said, when I first started, I'm Nancy DeStasio. I'm your family librarian, bringing you, hopefully, a kaleidoscope of programming through literacy and technology to enrich your life. And tonight, we are so excited to welcome author Juliet Grimes, who
Hi,
wrote the book.
everybody.
And there she is. And I'll tell you a little bit about Juliet, and then we're going to get going. Juliet Grimes was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and raised in a tight-knit Italian-American family where storytelling, loud storytelling, over long tables of food was the preferred Sunday afternoon activity. She always dreamed of being a writer, but didn't think it was a realistic career path. After studying abroad stints in Japan, Taiwan, and at Oxford, Grimes graduated magna cum laude from Columbia with a degree in history and a goal of becoming a book editor, which seemed like a charming alternative to writing books herself. After editorial jobs at John Wiley and the Overlook Press, she joined Soho Press as an editor in 2010. Today, she is Senior Vice President and Associate Publisher, where she curates the critically acclaimed Soho crime imprint of international and multicultural mysteries and thrillers. Now, after 15 years of editing other writers, Grimes is grateful to have been able to return to her childhood dream of being a writer herself. The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna is a culmination of many years of research, interviews, and writing in the early morning before the workday. She is currently at work on a second book, yay, a crime novel set in Calabria in 1960, and hopes she can eventually use it as a really good excuse for a research trip to Italy.
When we're allowed to leave our houses again.
So please join me in welcoming our guest author this evening, Juliet Grimes.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you all for coming out. I know it's a busy week, and it's these events from home. I really cherish them because it's kept me connected to people during all this. So thank you so much for being a part of that, and thank you for reading. Thank you for patronizing your library.
So Juliet, as you know, we've spoken before, and I was really enthralled with your book. I found it amazing, upsetting, thought-provoking, interesting, relatable, as an Italian who also sat around the big tables and talked loudly about all the things. So please tell all of us how you got the idea for this amazing story.
Sure. Well, okay. So Mary held up the hardcover. Thank you, Mary. I like that. And this is the paperback. They do look at a little bit different. But the 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna is, it's a novel. It is fiction, but it was really very closely inspired by my own family story, which has obsessed me my entire life. So the story of the novel is, it's 5 generations in the history of an Italian-American family that emigrates in the 1930s from Calabria, which is the very toe of the boot in Italy. And it follows them through all kinds of family dramas and vicissitudes, the 2 world wars, what the equivalent of the Depression was in Italy, in this very rural village, emigration to the United States, negotiating a kind of bicultural identity, and then the generation that's born in America and what happens from there. And the whole story is told through the lens of 2 sisters who are, their names are Stella and Tina, and they are best friends. And they share everything. And then when you meet them in the present day, they're both about 100 years old, and they've been locked in a blood feud for 30 years. And no one in their family has any idea what happened to break them apart, or, how they had gone from being best friends to really bitter enemies. So the story for me, I did grow up, as you said, in a really tight-knit Italian-American family, and I was always very proud of that, very interested in immigrant history, specifically Italians, but more generally, we all have these immigrant antecedents, and I always think it's so interesting to think about the stories of where our ancestors came from, why they left, how they met their partners, especially if their partner is from another culture, right? These stories that Americans have are so different than most other places in the world, because we have that mashup and that encounter and that double identity of the culture we came from and this new thing that we are, this American thing. So this just fascinated me my entire life. But the story specifically about these sisters, can you guys mind if I throw up some images? I've got some photos I could share. Is that okay? So I'm going to share with you a little photo that was taken about 37 years ago. That's me in the middle. As you can see, I am almost the exact same. I have a little more hair now than I did then, but not a lot. So the two ladies here on the left, that's my grandmother. And on the right is my great aunt. And they raised me while my parents were working when I was a baby. They taught me all of their tricks and their songs and their stories. My first words were in Calabrese's baby talk, which was very frustrating to my father, who is not Italian and had no idea what I was saying. But they were really my world. And you know, I was lucky. I had them in my life until just last year. They passed away at age 98 and 97. But so they were always together. They were best friends. They had married a pair of best friends. And after they came to America, they settled in the Hartford, Connecticut area. And they were working in factories in the tobacco fields there. And then met these two prospects who were best friends at the time, got married, bought houses right next door to each other. So they shared one garden between them, and they raised all of their kids together in this one garden. And I say all of their kids together. My grandmother had way too many kids, and my aunt was unable to have any. She was not lucky in fertility. So basically it was like they had two moms for this one brood, because it was way, way too many for my grandmother to handle alone. And so everything was like this all the time until I was 5 years old. And then my grandmother had an accident, and she suffered a cerebral trauma, and her life was saved by a lobotomy. But after she woke up from her coma, she refused to ever speak to her sister again. And she was really angry about something, but she could never explain what, because she'd been lobotomized. So not all the connections weren't there anymore. So she went on to live another 30 years after that. The whole of my life, basically, because I was 5 when this happened. And it was really traumatizing for the family. It was a rift down the middle, because my aunt, who had been like a second mother to my mother's generation and all of those kids, she was suddenly kind of cut off. She couldn't come to family dinners anymore. She couldn't come to Christmas because my grandmother, who had been lobotomized, would, try to do her physical harm. She would, she was not right. She had been surgically altered. So she was dangerous. And my aunt was heartbroken. She had lost her best friend. She had kind of been demoted to a second-class mom in this situation, although my mom and all of her brothers did their absolute best, to try to make up for it and go have separate Christmas dinners with her and all of that. It was just really heartbreaking. And for 30 years, no one could ever bridge that gap. And they died still in this really awful, bitter state of antipathy, and no one will ever really know what went wrong. But as you can probably tell from the way I'm telling this story, I had become really obsessed with that, what had happened between them, and this sadness of especially my aunt. Let me share a picture of my aunt, because she was my really good friend. We were buddies. I would call her 2 or 3 times a day, and every day, even after I moved away to go to college. And she really helped me when I started working on this. And I was saying, I really want to write a family history. I want to try to write your stories. She sat down and she gave me hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews. And she set me on the course of all of the other research I did, the oral histories I collected, the archival work I did, some of the more straight up genealogical and text-based history that I was able to ferret out. It all came from her. She was my starting point. And yeah, so she was a huge inspiration for this story. So that's what I did. I capture it there, I guess. So what ended up happening was I started collecting family stories from my aunt. And she could tell me a lot about my grandmother and this lost history of this woman who couldn't really tell her own story anymore because of the lobotomy. And she helped me understand a lot about who my grandmother had been before her brain was altered. But in the process, she introduced me to the stories of many other women in their generation, Italian women, Italian American women, immigrant women, this community that they had entered in Hartford, the community she came from in a village called Jevoli in Calabria. And I realized that I really wanted to write a celebration of their generation that is so vastly misunderstood. These are women who were born in the teens and 20s. This is a time when women are not citizens in Italy. They're literally the possessions of their fathers or then their husbands. They don't have a legal entity. They can't control money or land, anything like that. But they are these forces of nature with these incredible stories. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of them, at least in my grandmother's town, in her generation, they weren't literate. They never had an access to education. They did not have public libraries like I did to work in, and they were humble about the value of their own stories, and so their stories would get lost or buried. But they are hilarious. They are poignant. They are the fabric of our own DNA. These are. I mean, they've done studies now that show that we inherit things like trauma and instinct and even hobbies generationally, that it can trace down 7 or 14 generations. And these are things, the things that our grandmothers went through are part of us. And I wanted to tell stories of that generation, of what they went through, because they were brave and incredible people. So what started as a family story ended up becoming more of a family in the sense that it's more of an homage to the women of this generation and immigrant women in general. So that's my book.
That's absolutely fascinating. So how much of the story is factual?
I wish I could answer that question. I don't even know at the end, because it took me a long time to write. You alluded to this when you were reading my bio, but I also work as an editor. It's a very time and brain consuming job to work on other people's text all the time. So I would, find spare hours or weekends to work on my book over the course of about 10 years. And during that time, I wrote, I researched, I expanded, I borrowed a little bit from here or there. I learned this other new fascinating fact. And by the end, I don't even remember. I just don't remember. So you have to assume everything in it is fiction. But, some of the weirdest stories in the book are not fiction. And I think that's the thing to know about that generation. They had to do these things that sound really outrageous to us. They had to survive these challenges that for us are in our cushy lives. So I'll give you an example. The title is The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, because my grandmother did in fact experience 8 near-death experiences during her life. And so I thought that was such an outrageous fact that I was like, this is the framework of the story. So I have the character of Stella does have 8 near-death experiences, just like my grandmother did. I did not fictionalize those. And one of them, the first one, is so bizarre that I just couldn't even believe it happened if I couldn't see her scars, see what she survived. But so my grandmother lived in a village of 200 people, in the tip top of a mountain that didn't have a road in it. When she was born, Mussolini ended up building roads in the late 20s and early 30s. But at this time, most of the villages in Calabria had been built defensively because, 1,000 years earlier, all of these raiders would come into the coast and people fled up to the mountains. So they made these villages that literally don't even have a road you can get in on. No electricity, obviously, no running water, nothing like that. No doctor. The closest doctor is 45 minutes away on foot down this goat path. You go running down the mountain to the doctor if you need him. And so my grandmother was 4 years old, not even 4 years old, 3.5, and she was had a pan of boiling oil tipped over on her. Her mother was deep frying eggplant slices, and she ended up getting third-degree burns over a huge swath of her body. And I knew this fact from when I was a little child, because they always told me, they would show me the scars on her arm. She had the burn scar on this arm, and on this arm she had her skin graft scar, because they had taken the good flesh from this arm to put it on this arm. And I just, it was one of the earliest facts I knew when I was like, 4. Oh, skin graft, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's the thing. I was just describing the village to you. So as I was researching the history of this, I started to really question the reality of that story, because how could they perform a skin graft in a village with no running water, no antiseptic? Skin graft science was only developed in wake of World War I for some of the survivors of trench warfare, because they were sustaining new kinds of injuries that they thought, oh, with skin graft, we might actually be able to save lives we couldn't before. This is brand new science. And this is a backwater village that was still 98% illiterate when this is happening in the 1920s. And I was like, okay, something isn't right here about this story. And it just didn't. Can you even imagine surviving that? Like, your antiseptic is a lemon. You squeeze a lemon on something to prevent the spread of disease. It just, so then what would happen is I'd encounter something completely unbelievable like that, and I would have to dig even deeper. And as it turns out, one of the pioneer universities in skin graft science was the University of Messina in Sicily. As the crow flies, only about 50 miles from the village where my grandmother was born. So although it seems completely beyond belief, there was a young man from the town next door to hers who ended up going and getting a surgery degree in Sicily. Although I don't know if I have any Sicilians on the call tonight. I want to hear what your parents told you about Calabrese, because there's like a thing, I mean, the idea that a Calabrese person would go to Sicily or a Sicilian person would come to Calabria, among my grandparents' generation, it was a little problematic. So I'm just thankful that this guy, for whatever reason, bridged that mental gap and decided to go to Sicily and learn the skill and come back and save my grandmother's life. But I encountered story after story like this, these things that beggared belief, but that in the time, these difficult times when everyone was so poor and they had so little, they did these extraordinary things to survive. They were really tough. They were so tough.
Absolutely fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? And I know you went to Italy to do some research, and do you have relatives there still? And like, how did you make all those connections to get the dirt?
At the time I had no relatives. The funny thing about, if you're Italian American and you go to Italy, whether or not you have relatives there when you arrive, you have a lot of relatives when you leave. Just a warning, unless that's what you want, which is what I wanted. And now I feel like I have a huge family, the entire village of Yevoli. But yeah, and I'm happy to talk quite a bit about the research tonight if you guys want to hear that, because I know, the genealogy component is very interesting to me, and I know that brought a lot of people in tonight. But I think the first thing I should say is that it was heavily based on interviews. I think I interviewed more than 50 women from this generation and a little bit younger. I kind of, ages 50 and up, because I people who I wanted, if they could remember their mother's experiences, and but I really wanted to know about that immigrant generation and the generation that left Italy. And a lot of these women are or were illiterate. They didn't have the traditional skills that we think of about history. At least I was taught to think of history in a very kind of ivory tower, like texts and footnotes and citations, and they didn't have that. And in fact, what they have instead for disseminating tradition is often ignored, I think, by historians. Things like recipes and folk songs and proverbs that ended up being so important to me. And but really, that's what I did. During these interviews, I would try to pull a thread like that and then just keep going. And sometimes if you could get a little bit of text from someone, a line from a song, you can Google it later and you can try to trace its origins or whatever. But for the most part, you're relying on nothing written until you can really ferret stuff out and then back it up with text. So yeah, like I said, more than 50 people generously told me their stories. A lot of them introduced me to other people to talk to, which was great. Um,
Did you have an interpreter, or do you speak Italian, or how did you?
I speak Italian. I grew up with my mother's dialect in my ear, and then I speak standard Italian. So I unfortunately can't speak dialect very well. I can mimic you if you say something to me, but I understand it, which is really lucky because a lot of these women also didn't speak Italian. I happened to run into a real bit of luck. So I left my job. I took a leave of absence for the winter of 2015, and I went to Yevoli to live there. And there happened to be an unemployed lawyer who lived next door, and she was awesome because she had nothing else to do. So she had worked for the Red Cross in Uganda, so she spoke fluent English. So she would accompany me and help me translate questions when I was going in the other direction, talking to people who only spoke dialect. So yeah, her name is Francesca. And I'm so grateful to her that I've named the main character in my next book after her because she was so great. But yeah, so after the interviews, when you do have a thread to hang on to, and you're like, oh, this thing that happened when she was 4 in 1926, and then I supplemented that with archival research. And I think if you are Italian, you're really lucky because the village that your forebears came from will have a lot of records. Not every country in the world is like this, but Italians have been, I'm going to put you all on gallery view so I can see. Would you hold up your hand if you're Italian? I'm curious who in the audience is Italian. Okay, and keep them up because I have 2 pages to scroll through. Okay, cool. So we've got some Italians in the house. So all of you, if you want to go back to your people's village, that you're in luck because they're going to have so much information for you there. They are the way that Americans yearn for our identity and those heritage roots, which, I said is unique to Americans, right? Or almost unique to Americans. But in Italy, they have that same yearning on the other flip side, because during the aughts and teens and 20s, they lost more than 50% of the population of the South ended up emigrating. Because of the really terrible conditions following the unification of Italy. And a lot, not all of them are in America or, in the United States. They'll say that they're in America, but they mean Argentina, Canada, or Australia, Germany. I mean, they're all over the world. Some of them even emigrated to Milan or Turin or points north. But the south of Italy was decimated. And there is this gaping wound there of lost family. So when you go to a village, even though you've never been there before, you don't know anyone, you have no family there are people who are waiting for you. They're going to try to make those connections, and they're going to figure out which uncle of yours was a great uncle of theirs, and what you have in common. And there's a lot of the passion is two-sided there, that desperation for figuring out the shared roots. And so that was really helpful to me, but also specifically the archives. So I'll show you some of the things that I found, actually. I found, this was just in the public records, that they keep not only birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, property, and other ecumenical records, like the parish church. The Catholic Church of the town will have a whole bunch of other records besides the traditional ones. They keep emigration records. There's a copy of visas for the people who left, where they went. You'll know so much about them. So if you are an ancestry detective, you have so much to work with. This is my great grandmother, and I never had a chance to meet her in real life, but for me, at least, when I found this picture, it made my heart stop, because I had only been able to imagine her, and seeing her face, I was like, ah. So I ended up using her name exactly as it was for a character in the book, because I was so struck by this woman, this face of this person who had been my forebear. And I found other things too. There's lots, if you have the patience for it. There's a lot of even quite narrative record. You see a marriage certificate right now? Yeah, so this is a marriage certificate, and you can see there's a lot of text there. Isn't this fun? So you can get a lot of information from just one document. It can kind of put a lot of the town into perspective, not just who got married on what day, but who they were related to, where they lived, where they were born. This is awesome. And then sometimes you catch some really scandalous things in archival research, like this. This is a favorite of mine. Let me see. So this is a birth certificate. If anyone knows any Italian, you can see atti di nascita means certificate of birth. And do you see the X going through it? That is because, I'm sorry, I have so many photos open. This was canceled. This is my great-grandfather's canceled birth certificate. If you pick through some of this amazing scrawling handwriting. I'm trying to see if you can see it. It's really hard to make out, but it says that he's figlio naturale, which means a natural son, which, as you know, in Victorian times was what they called bastards. So this birth certificate was canceled when my bastard great-grandfather was formally adopted by his biological father, which happened when he was 9 years old. So they went back retroactively and canceled his birth certificate. So guess how many of his children my great-grandfather had told he was a bastard. That was something he left behind in Italy. And it was a shock when I found this. No one in my family knew what he had been running away from. And this is kind of like one of the more innocent things that popped out during research. I have read so many stories about the incredible things that are concealed in archives. And I think it's, fascinating to delve into them. And also most paese, the most towns in Italy, they have an officer who's responsible for this stuff who will get back to you and will correspond with you about it. Will help you try to make these connections, which is really, really useful. Yeah, let's see. What else did photo research was really important to me. Luckily some stuff came out of just like pouring through people's old photo albums. So I was able to find things like period photographs. This was in a folk museum in a town over, but this photo was taken in 1921 in if you end up reading my novel, you know that Jevoli is a teeny tiny town of 200 people, but there's a big city that they go to when they need to go shopping or something like that, called Nicastro. This is Nicastro in 1921. And just the costumes are so particular. This region was so isolated. So finding stuff like this was really helpful. The bundles on the heads, the barefoot children and the chickens, and finding stuff like this really helped me visualize this world I was trying to create. Of course, then just other people's family photos brought me things like this. Like my family, they didn't ever have a camera. There's no photos of their youth at all, but someone in 1957, which is well after they left, had this camera. So at least I got to see what the inside of a house looked like, even though this is 30 years after they lived there. I was like, okay, I can still see that there's daub wall, stone walls. I can still see how they're dressed. Things like this helped ferreting out other people's family photos. And what else can I tell you? Oh, yeah, the folk museum was really helpful because I learned a lot about the textiles that they did there, which are huge, basically what all women were doing all the time. You were never having a conversation when you weren't also processing some kind of textile, because if you weren't doing that, your children didn't have any clothes to wear because it's so time consuming, right? So seeing this like farm work and daily labor in action by going there and observing it really helped me figure out what women's lives were like in a way that isn't recorded in textbooks very much. What I was just showing you is really cool. That I guess I'll show it again. Sorry, I should have kept it up while I was talking. This is a fabric that's made out of a combination of linen and silk. So one of the things that came out of my grandmother's lobotomy she had all these fresh memories that she had kind of lost or buried during her adult life, that when they cut off a third of her frontal lobe, they were suddenly really fresh. So after her accident, she started telling me about being a silkworm farmer when she was a little girl, and she had never mentioned this. My mother had no idea. She was like, oh, I thought silk came from Asia. What are you talking about? Is in Italy. Actually, as it turns out, the Arabs who ruled southern Italy from the 800s through the 1200s introduced silk road. They were silk trade, because from the Silk Road, directly from China, and they brought all of these, what the village women called silk seeds, little eggs of silkworms to hatch, and the women would hatch them they would like wrap them under their dresses and hatch them like babies against their breasts, and then they would spend the whole month of July every year 24/7 for 28 days changing mulberry leaves in their reed trays, and then when the worms spun cocoons, they would process them and sell them, and that was what their dowries were, because they couldn't control money, but they could make a dowry out of silk. So that blanket I showed you is an example of a dowry blanket, where a silk, they would weave the silk and the linen together into this beautiful piece of textilery. So all of these things filled women's lives all the time, on top of the drama of, not having your husband at home because he's emigrated across the world, of trying to raise your children all alone when you have no money, and also trying to, raise all of the crops to feed them. And it really started to complete the picture for me of how complex these people's lives were and how sophisticated their planning and strategy had to be. And then add on to that the drama of things like courtship and romance and fighting with your sister. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Amazing. Did your mother know a lot of these things, or was this all a big surprise to her, do you think?
My mother definitely, she was incredibly helpful this whole process, because she knew a lot of things and she could kind of point me where to go to ask for more information. But their stuff came as a surprise to her too. And, it was a really cool process to learn about her family history, and then to be able to bring new information to her. And then eventually, after I was done with the book, actually it was, the book had sold for publication. It was in 2017. So I finally made her go back to Calabria, because she had never been. She had only, and we had a 2-woman road trip, which was probably the subject matter for a whole other book. But it was really, really wonderful. It was a wonderful experience.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, does anybody have any questions? Don't be shy. Put your questions in the chat.
Yeah, please do. Please don't be shy. And also, I put my email address in there in case you have anything you wanted to ask me privately. Please do feel free to be in touch.
That's fabulous. Okay, well, we'll wait and see if some questions come in. Meanwhile, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our second guest who's here with us tonight, Rhonda Hoffman, my coworker from the Central Library. So Rhonda has been a genealogy librarian for 18 years, and she currently serves as the genealogy specialist for the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library System at Central, where we both work. She has a Master of Library Science from the University of Buffalo and a Bachelor's of Arts in History from SUNY Geneseo. Rhonda has been researching her own genealogy for over 2 decades and previously owned a part-time genealogy research business. Rhonda is the editor of the Western New York Genealogical Society's journal and volunteers for Search Angels, a nonprofit organization which helps reunite adoptees with their birth families through the use of DNA testing and traditional genealogy research. And join me in welcoming Rhonda, and she's going to tell us about all the interesting things going on at Central and in the genealogy world.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to just pull up my little presentation that I have for you. It's just brief. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Grosvenor Room, it's our special collections department. We have genealogy, local history, maps, rare books, and music scores. I think the best asset of the room is our lovely staff who are experts in all of these different materials. So I highly recommend that you come visit us. I thought I'd just talk briefly a little bit about how I got started with genealogy. I just, from the time I was a young adult, I always felt a pull towards family history. I had a strong need to find out where I came from. I mean, I don't want to say it's exactly like an adoptee, but I needed to know. As Nancy mentioned, I've been doing genealogy for over 20 years. And, you know, finally, a few years ago, I finally felt like calm and grounded with my own genealogy, like I'd found enough about my family, how they blended together, how their stories fit in American history, and where I fit in my family. And I'd like to show you a little bit about what the library has to offer to help you learn about your family stories. So we do have a large collection of Buffalo area newspapers back from 1810 to the present. This obituary here is my fourth great grandfather, Aradus Lyman Root. And I found out from this obituary that he served in the War of 1812 and that he fought near the Buffalo area. He was taken prisoner of war at Fort Erie. And I also learned that he was one of the first people to start working on the construction of the Erie Canal, which I just was surprised to hear that. He is my favorite ancestor, I have to say. Maybe I shouldn't have favorites, but I just find him so interesting. I don't know why, I just do. This is the church record of my great grandfather, Stephen, I'll say Polson Hoffman. The library has lots of church records from the early 1800s into like the 1910s, maybe 20s. Some we have more recent than that. We have lots of Catholic, Episcopal, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and some other denominations too. And when I was doing my genealogy research, through talking with family members and through looking at church records, looking at some local church records as well as some church records in Poland, that's where my family is from, I found out that my maiden name, Hoffman, really shouldn't be my maiden name. I found out that the real name is Polson and not Hoffman. So you never know what you're going to find out when you do your genealogy research. Maybe your last name is totally different. I mean, a lot of people Americanize their name, but usually it's something similar, but this one was just totally different. Church records are a great resource to find out where your family is from in a foreign country if you don't know. So I found out that they're from an area called Patulin, which is in the Posen region. It's now called I don't know how to say it right, Wielkopolski or something like that. It's like central western Poland. So I found that out from these records. The library has different cemetery records. I think these are really interesting. A lot of times we'll have like a death register where it will say, you know, why someone died and their date of death and where they lived. But then there are these cemetery plots. And it's always interesting because you'll see a bunch of names that you don't know who they are. So you've got another mystery to solve, like why is that person in that plot? Why are they buried with my family? One of our popular collections, we have some vital records. The most popular collection is our marriage records. We have Erie County marriage records from 1877 up into 1935. And these are a great place if you don't know a woman's maiden name. This is a great place. You can look up the man's name and find the woman's maiden name. And you can also find parents' names this way. So if you don't know the generation beyond who you're looking for, you can find their parents, including their mother's maiden name, which is, women can be difficult to research. They can be hidden because they didn't have a lot of rights until more recently. So they weren't in as many records as men are. We have some great property maps where you can learn about your ancestors' neighborhood. These are called Sanborn maps. They were made as fire insurance maps. So in this company, Sanborn, would draw these maps and sell them to insurance companies who would use them to make their premiums. So you can see really detail about all of the buildings. So you can look up where your ancestor lived. Sorry if you're hearing that. And you can see the outline of the buildings. They tell you how many stories the buildings are. They tell you the use of the building. So a lot of these you see like D on them. That means it's a domicile or a home. Public buildings will be labeled. You can see like here's St. Stanislaus Church and the school. You'll see businesses sometimes very detailed. You can see the layout of the businesses where if you know what your ancestor did in that business, you might see exactly where their department was. So they're really fascinating to look through. We also have a number of digital collections that anyone can use online for free. You don't need a library card or anything. So if you're out from outside the area, you can see all of these collections. One of them, we have lots of old Buffalo photos. So you can browse through those, a lot of street scenes. You see a lot of buildings. We do have a lot of old school buildings too. So you might see what the building looked like when your ancestor went to school. We have a collection of Buffalo city directories, which city directories are great for beginner researchers if you're a beginner. We have Buffalo directories from 1832 up to 1913 online, but these city directories, they still publish them today. So we have a complete collection in the Grosvenor Room. This one is from 1836. These are very similar to phone books where you can look up somebody's name. It would be usually the head of household and other adults who work outside the home. And you can see where they lived. So you'll see their address and you'll also see their profession. So they're better than just phone books. And a lot of times you'll see whether they own their home. There might be an H by the address, which means they own their home. Or you might see BDS for they boarded at that place, or R means that they resided but didn't own the home. So you can see where they moved around. And that's helpful because, if you're looking for church records about your ancestor, you want to know what churches were near where they lived. So, Buffalo had a lot of different churches. It was a big city back in the day. So that is really helpful. And they also can serve as a great guide for your genealogy research because they will tell things like what churches were in the area, what cemeteries existed when your ancestor died, what clubs they might have belonged to, what schools they might have went to. The most fascinating thing that I think we have on our website are the Erie County Poorhouse records. This particular one that I'm showing you, we have this set called Children Bound Out by Erie County Superintendents of the Poor. This is from 1864 through 1867. There were a lot of orphans because of the Civil War. And that might be some of the reason why some of these children are in the home. And what they would do is if a child went in the home, they would bind them out to people to work for them. So on the left-hand side, or the top left, we see somebody's name and their age and where they were born, the country they were born in. It tells the date that they came in. And then it says the cause. The top view, you can see father in the army, father not found, father deserted. And on the right-hand side, you see who they went with. Sometimes you'll see they went back with a family member. So a couple you see with their mother. But then you'll see some others, you see different people's names and that they lived in a different town. And that was the children going to live with these other people to work with them. They even bound out infants just as companions. And sometimes this would be maybe a pre-adoption kind of trial too. Maybe these people would take them in. So if you know your ancestor was adopted, it might even say in these records that this person adopted them. So this is a good adoption resource too. Besides this volume, we have just people coming into the poorhouse, and you see we also have some death records. We have some coroner reports associated with the poorhouse records. A lot of migrant workers went into the poorhouse during the off season because they couldn't survive without it. A lot of people went into the poorhouse, even though you would think a particular ancestor wouldn't go in here. if they couldn't afford healthcare for some reason, near the end of their days, they might have gone in here, the poorhouse, for hospital care. Or you might see, single women coming in here and they give birth when they're in the poorhouse. A great resource for anyone doing genealogy, we have some subscription databases. We have Ancestry Library Edition, which is just almost the same thing as Ancestry.com. And normally you can just use this through us at any one of our locations. You have to visit the library to use it, but because of the pandemic, Ancestry is letting us let you use it from home all the way through December. So if you have a card with us, you can use it from home. So I would take advantage of that. Ancestry is great. It has one of the best resources to start when you're doing your genealogy is census records. They come out every 10 years. We have through 1940 now to do research, so you can use the census records in here for all over the country. They have tons of passenger lists, so if you're looking for when your immigrant ancestor came over, you can use Ancestry for that. There's vital records, there's military records, there's tons of stuff in Ancestry. We also have Heritage Quest online, and Heritage Quest has the same census records as in Ancestry. They have lots of city directories for all over the country, and they have thousands of local histories and family histories and some military records too. And Heritage Quest, if you have a card with us, you can always use from home with your library card for free. And I'm hoping that if you haven't done genealogy, or maybe you do genealogy and you haven't seen these classes that we have to offer, that you'll join me for some of these classes. So October 14th at 2, we're going to do Climb Generations with Census Records. So we're going to go through how you use census records in conjunction with other records to do your family history research. I was inspired to create a Finding Your Female Ancestors class because of Stella Fortuna. I thought, we're going to do a class on women. So that is a brand new class I've not taught before, so I'm excited about that on October 21st. We're really lucky here. We're getting authors to come and talk to our patrons. So I'm excited to have another author on October 28th. The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are. The author is Libby Copeland, and she weaves her book weaves stories of unexpected DNA results, along with talking about just DNA testing in general, the business of it, the ethics of it. It's really great. And then on November 17th, I'm going to do a Genealogy 101 class. It'll give some tips for starting as well as what we have at the library. And then Stella Fortuna also inspired me to have a family history sharing session, which is going to be on December 2nd. So I just thought, we can come together and talk about our family stories, or just, if you found some interesting record about your ancestor, or you just want to share anything about your research, I thought it would be fun to talk with you guys about that. So that's what we're going to do in the next couple of months for genealogy, and I really do hope to see you there, because if you can't tell, I love genealogy. So anytime I can talk to people about it, I'm excited. And that's everything from me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was fabulous. And we could, first of all, as you know, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to look at this, but we could also email everybody that registered with those dates as well. So you'll have those handy if you're interested in any of those programs. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Oh my gosh. I need to get over into that room and start looking up my family. Really take it for granted.
I mean, those are incredible. What incredible records you have. This is such to have all of that in one place. And I want to go to your family story sharing session. That sounds amazing. My favorite part about having published this book is now people will see their stories. So I'll be like, oh, my grandmother. It's the best. I love hearing other people's stories.
Amazing. So we have a bunch of questions that came in through our chat. So I'll just read through those. Sandy said, thought it was interesting that women may have not really wanted to emigrate to the U.S., but had to because their husband said they had to join them.
Yeah, actually it's pretty fascinating. So women became citizens in Italy in 1945. The first time they got to vote was in the election of 1946. And even, until much, much later, they didn't have a lot of the same equal rights that men did. I won't get into that now. That's what my next book's all about. But the thing about the discomfort of this immigration question is that if you were going to leave home to go to somewhere like America, life was going to be much easier in some ways. You would have running water, you would have flushing toilets, you wouldn't have to walk 2 miles down a mountain to the river to get water to bring back up 2 miles up the mountain to cook your dinner at night, or to like wash your baby's bottom, or whatever the thing was. Everything was just such a struggle, right? But also you didn't have there were incredible hardships with immigration. There's incredible hardships with facing in a new culture, like being completely for the rest of your life disconnected from your home and your own culture, and just giving that up entirely, turning your back on your past. So it really, I think the conversation among women is interesting, because some of them are like, you know what? I don't want to walk 2 miles down the mountain every day to get the water, and I want to try this new thing. And then for some of them, they were almost prisoners of this new life because they had no access, they had no schooling, they had no language, they couldn't work, they couldn't get visas, and they were bound by these strictures of the life they had come from. And they're trying to go to a new place where much more is expected of women as public integers and people in society. And I mean, how many times have you heard somebody uncharitably say, oh, well, they should learn English if they're going to live here? It's really hard to learn a second language, to function in a second language. It's really, really hard. And I just think about, especially, imagine you didn't even know an alphabet. How are you going to learn another language? So I found in my grandmother's generation, when I was talking to people, they would be really mixed. Like one woman would have had both of these competing like opinions about their past. Oh, if only I could have stayed at this place I loved, but also was really hard. Didn't have the choice. You had to do what your husband said. So it's really a topic.
Juliet, your internet's a little shaky.
Sorry, yeah, I just saw it cut out. I think I'm back.
You're back. Okay.
God, everything froze.
Okay. Rose says, I read your book and enjoyed it. However, I found the description of the men so brutal. And you may recall I made the same comment before. Were these stories based on fact? I hate to think all Italian men were like that.
Yeah, this is a hard topic. This is another uncomfortable topic. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I'll first say, no, not all Italian men are like that. This is not a book about Italy. It's a specific family story, right? However, that's a facile answer. And the fact is that when laws don't protect women and they make them property, A, and B, when laws don't give men any chance to ever rise above their circumstances because they hog tie them to ancient feudal practices or predatory post-colonial practices. So you can never get out of the grind of poverty. You have a lot of really miserable people, and miserable people forced into miserable marriages. And you also have a legal code that literally, so the Italian, I said I wasn't going to talk about this, but I am, sorry. There's an Italian legal code called the Rocco Code, which was codified by Mussolini in 1933. And was still in existence until the 1980s. That my favorite one little fact here is that it basically says if you commit a crime, you know what your punishment is going to be, because it's always kind of cut and dry. If you commit a homicide, you will go to jail for 12 years. Unless the homicide you commit is, quote, under a person under your authority, meaning a child or a wife or a ward of yours, in which case the prison term is only 2 years. And if you can prove that you sustained an injury during the act of committing the homicide, then it will be lessened to make up for whatever you were clearly defending yourself against. In other words, a man can beat his wife essentially with total impunity. She's under his authority. That's his right. And in fact, if he kills her while he's beating her, there's very little that can ever be done to bring him to justice. So in an ideal world where you have, you know, men who are very, very good people, they, despite the poverty that's endemic, the fact that they have no chance at ever brightening their future, and the fact that the society is telling them that they should control their wife and, you know, raise a fist to her if that's what she needs to make her be a good woman, you still are going to have men who reject all of that, and they're gentle and they're kind along the lines of what we think a man should be today. If you want to superimpose that upon people, there are men like that. But the other thing is that there were really good men who were, by our modern standards, broken by the system. And I think that we need to somehow figure out, embrace that cognitive dissonance and acknowledge that our grandfathers may have done things to our grandmothers that we would find abhorrent, but that doesn't mean we have to throw away this story and this legacy. It doesn't mean that our grandfather was a bad person. And we can still love him and love what he gave us, and without having to throw away our grandmother's story or bury it or suppress it, because that's what happens when we have to protect the legacy of the men who came before us by not talking about the things that they did that by our modern standards are unattractive. What we do is we bury the things that our grandmothers suffered and that they went through. And that's where we get this trauma in our DNA that we can't acknowledge or understand. And so that's really kind of the bones of this. I want us to, I don't want to spoil the book for anyone, but I did want for the reader to experience a sense of discomfort when they try to figure out or try to decide for themselves if they think a person is good or bad, if the things that this person did under circumstances, like, are they still lovable? These are questions we need to ask about our own families, and we need to figure out how we can keep asking the questions even though the answers are uncomfortable. And we have to figure out how we love people who have made what we think are, you know, unforgivable errors. It's really important for our own identity.
Amazing. Question from Ellen. Can Juliet tell us about the crime book she's working on now?
Ellen, do you mean the crime novel I'm writing or the crime novel I'm editing for my day job? I'm going to assume you mean the one I'm writing, right? Is that right? Yeah, thanks. So I'm writing a novel. I've actually finished a draft. It's with my beta reader right now, which means if it's good, then maybe I will let someone read it in like 2 to 3 years. I have to keep editing it forever. It's set in 1960, and it is set in the Aspromonte Mountains in Calabria, which are deep south, like almost by Sicily, that far south. And it's an area that I encountered while I was researching Stella Fortuna. It's so fascinating. It is the area that the Calabrese mob, the 'Ndrangheta, came out of, which is this brigand history, 200 years of tradition about brigandry and you know, government resistance, and it's really interesting. It's also there are a number of villages in these mountains where people still speak Byzantine Greek. They have been so secluded for 1,000 years that they are still speaking a language that they spoke before the Italians took over. So I thought that was really fascinating. But I wanted to write a mystery that dealt with these themes of immigration and good men. I wrote so much about women in my first book. I wanted to give something to all the grandpas whose legacies I didn't get to cover here. So the plot is a 27-year-old American woman. Again, it's 1960. She's very idealistic, college graduate, you know, very fancy background, is living in southern Italy, working for a charity that is kind of into post-war reconstruction, and they build nursery schools because they try to reduce infant mortality. So she's there kind of as an agent of health and well-being in this tiny village. And while she's there, there's a flood that knocks over a building in the middle of the town, and underneath is a skeleton. And so this town is so remote in the mountains, it has no law enforcement, there's no police there, it's really remote. The skeleton disappears and no one ever follows up about it. And she's like, well, that's a little weird. Why was there a skeleton not in consecrated ground in the churchyard? I have some questions, but no one seems bothered by it, so she doesn't say anything. And a couple weeks later, an old woman comes up to her and says, I want you to help me, Maestra. I think that the skeleton that was unearthed is my son, who disappeared 40 years ago. And they told me that he emigrated, but then he never wrote home. And I think that maybe he was a victim of an accident. Can you help me figure out if this is him? And she's like, oh, wait a minute. If you think your son was murdered, you got to call the police. The lady's like, no, not murder. No one said murder. And she's like, okay, I'm a sucker for an old lady. I'll help this old lady. So she starts to help the old lady. And then sure enough, another woman approaches her and says, I don't think it's that woman's son. I think it's my husband. He emigrated. They told me he emigrated, but then he never wrote again, and he's been missing for 10 years. And then a third woman approaches her and she's like, I think it's my missing father. And then suddenly at that point, our main character, Francesca, realizes that this is a village where men disappear and that she's in over her head and there's a big problem. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but it's been really fun because I got to research. I really got to get into immigrant stories and the patterns of where immigrant men ended up. I was very inspired by my grandfather, who had worked in the mines when he first arrived here and on the railroads, and who had been named after his name was Serafino, and he was named after an uncle he never met who had been killed tragically in the mines in somewhere in the United States, and they never knew what happened. And Rhonda, to your point, through genealogical research, we actually found out that he was murdered. It was fascinating and a really tragic story. But as this was all coming out, I started to think about these men who put their lives on the line to try to make their families' lives better, right? Risking everything, getting on a boat, going somewhere where they knew no one, they had no protections. And then sometimes they did disappear. What was their story? What were they risking? Were they casualties of fate, of this risk that they took? Were they opportunists? Did they run away? All these things that we'll never know about this generation that didn't have a way of keeping in touch or communicating. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also, I got to do a lot of genealogical research into a lot of other families while I was doing this. And it's also heartening to see the way people remade their lives and gave their families hope, and were able to send money home to their villages or to bring their children into better circumstances. So yeah, that's your nutshell. That's a big nutshell. Sorry.
I can't wait to read that. Okay, moving on. Mary McSwan says, hello, Juliet Grames. I must say you brought Stella Fortuna's life to life. Your story was so genuine, it sometimes felt as if I was in Calabria and Connecticut. The immigration photo you showed us was Stella. I thought I could pick this woman out of a lineup, all because you captured her perfectly with her story. Thank you. Your book was a pleasure to read, and I look forward to the next.
Thank you, Mary. That's so nice. Thank you. If you're ever in need of a job as a personal publicist, give me a call, because I like your sound bites. So good.
Okay, Stephen has a question for Rhonda. Are these genealogy classes in person or online?
They are online using Zoom. They are free online. You don't need to be a library card holder. Anyone can come to them.
All right, and looks like Patrick chimed in on that too. Rhonda's classes are on Zoom. Okay, and then Libby says, Juliet, we just read your book for our book club and had our meeting last night. We had such a great time discussing the book and the characters. Thank you for sharing your family with us. I apologize, I have to leave the Zoom early, but I have to run and get my kids. Oh, we all know about that. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And then Ellen responded it was about your writing. And then Rose says, my grandfather was born in Reggio Calabria, so your book helped me to understand his history.
Oh, Rose. So my next book is near the Reggio area, and there's a lot of those Greek speakers in and around Reggio. I bet that he had some Greek background, because they really held on to the bitter end. I mean, it was like the late 1800s that they stopped speaking Greek down there. It was great.
Amazing. Janine says the concept of women and kids as property was the norm throughout Europe until relatively recently. An interesting fact, the term rule of thumb comes from an old law in England, stating that a man could legally beat his wife as long as he used nothing larger than the diameter of his thumb to do so. Yikes.
It's definitely, I think, engaging with this history on a personal level, like where you're trying to recreate an individual's experience, really makes you grateful for what we have. And I know we have problems still that need to be rectified here. And it's always frustrating when people don't want to take them seriously. But to think of what our forebears went through, and just, I'm so grateful that I don't have to.
Yeah, I hear you. Patrick asks, on which site will the recording be? I believe it's going to be on Facebook. But again, I couldn't send out that information after, but I think it's going to be loaded right onto Facebook. I'm not positive about that, though. So we'll see about that. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? You had some really, really nice, interesting questions and comments.
Do please feel free to keep in touch if you are interested. I threatened Nancy that I'm gonna, as soon as I'm allowed to, I'm coming up to Buffalo. Yay! I've never been myself, and I'm aware of all the many attractions of your city, and I can't wait to see it. Can't wait to see the library and go through the genealogy room. So we'll do an in-person
personal tour.
Yeah, Buffalo is a very cool place. I mean, as you may know, it used to be the 12th largest city back at the turn of the century. And the architecture here is amazing. And, we're right next to Niagara Falls. It's just, there's a lot to do here. It's really an amazing place. A lot of things to see. And we have a fabulous library downtown too. So Ellen says, Juliet, your enthusiasm is so refreshing and inspiring.
Thank you. That's very nice.
And I have to agree. So, okay. Any other comments? Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Juliet, about anything? I can't wait for your next book. You think it's going to be a few years though before we actually get a look at it?
Well, I know how publishing works. So if I send it to my agent this year, and she sells it, it will probably come out in 2022. Best case scenario, probably 2022. Okay. Bad case scenario, 2023. But.
All right. Anybody else? I don't want to say goodbye. Oh, Sandy says, is there a title yet?
Oh, okay. So Sandy, I have a title for it that I don't think is going to stick, but where I'm calling it in my head is The Lost Boy of Santa Quionia. I think it's not going to stick. The name of the town is Santa Quionia, but I think that Americans are going to have trouble with that. I'll type it in the chat box so you can see how it's spelled. What do you all think? You can be my test group. Would that be hard for people to remember how it's spelled? I think, yeah. So I got to figure it out. The Lost Boy of the Aspromonte. I don't know. I got to figure something out that people will be able to type in if they don't know any Italian. So.
And Kimberly says, thank you, Juliet and Rhonda. I think not Italian, but enjoyed hearing your stories. I'll have to buy your book. Yes.
So if you do want to buy the book, your wonderful local independent bookstore, Talking Leaves, actually has signed copies. So I arranged that with Jonathan. Nancy arranged it with Jonathan. Thank you, Nancy. And they've been great. And you don't have to buy my book, but if you can, support your local independent bookstores because they are going through a really, really tough time right now. And they, like libraries, are a really crucial cultural component of our lives and of our access to ideas and culture. So yeah, give them a call. If you already have my book and you've already read it and you don't need it, but you want to buy something from them, let me know. I'll recommend a book to you.
Great. And then Rose says, there's a large Italian community in Buffalo. That's absolutely true. And a rich history of immigration to the west side. So that's true. So please do visit. And Dale says, if you know a lot about your family immigrant, I would like to know about the best way to narrate the story in a readable way. Would love a class on this.
Like a class on how to write your family story up. That's good. Rhonda, you should, that's your next step. If December 2nd goes well, expand that into the,
Right.
yeah, hey.
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
Rose, you're saying there's a large Italian community in Buffalo. Are you saying, if I read between the lines, that if I visit Buffalo and we do another event, it would be pretty easy to find a restaurant that would have themed food stuff that we could have at the event?
I'll cook for you. Oh, well, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure talking to you again tonight. And, you know, we've spoken before many times, and every time it's just, you're so uplifting, and I think we're related. You know, I was from Sicily, somebody from Calabria got together, you know, the Romeo and Juliet thing or something. So thank you again, really great. And Miranda, thank you so much. And, you know, we're all looking forward to your upcoming classes. And so I will send out that information. I have all your emails. And thank you again for joining us. Really wonderful.
Thank you all so much. It's so nice
Thank
to meet
you.